Broadcasting from occupied territories or the flea media, it's the Reality Dysfunction Podcast, a space where a diverse group of brown folk from across the nation explore the political experiences and social future of our Chicano Latino community. Control the narrative. Resist the dysfunction.
Hey everyone, this is Dr. Ernesto back with another episode of the Reality Dysfunction. I think that you all are going to find this one really interesting. I have two people on the show with me today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves now.
Hi, I'm Alex Lissa, and I'm here in Brooklyn, and I'm really excited about our topic for today.
I am too. My name is Lori Lizaragga. I'm a reporter, formerly in Denver. Now I'm in Dallas, where my family is, and I'm so excited to be getting to talk with both of you today on the Reality Dysfunction. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here, Lori. Like I was telling you earlier, when we were getting ready to do the episode, your story that ran, I think it was in the Denver Post.
Westworld.
That's right. Westworld. That's right. About your experiences at newspaper as a TV reporter there were sent to me by at least two different people that I know in Denver. And I just thought that it was really interesting, particularly the way that Westworld picked up the story itself, which I would say in my experience is a little unusual. That's one of the reasons why I reached out to you. But what I was really hoping right now is that you could just kind of give everybody that's listening sort of a breakdown of what transpired there. And, then we'll take it from there.
Sure. It was a long process deciding, by the way, where to put the piece and who to partner with on that. But it's not unique for Westward to have those opinion pieces, which is one of the reasons that I did approach the editor several weeks before it ended up getting published in Westward. So she was quite open to it. And of course, she wanted receipts, which I provided. But I knew that it would be a pretty good place to start. And it turned out, that it was, because they have, this whole opinion section. So that was great. And I'm really appreciative to the editor, Patty Calhoun, because she worked with me and gave me a lot of free reign to write what I wanted to write. What happened at 9 News is, unfortunately, what I'm learning happens to a lot of people of color in newsrooms across the country. There is a huge push right now, and has been, for several years, to bring in more diversity into newsrooms, whether that be because face value, you have to meet a quota, or because you're actually interested in what those journalists of color bring. Regardless, I was part of that push in our newsroom to diversify not just on-air talent, but just people in the newsroom in general. What I found, however, in coming to 9 News and coming to a state like Colorado that is very white, 70% white, I think is the state breakdown, is that diversity was a value to a certain extent. And instead of sort of deferring to the expertise of my lived experiences and the lived experiences of my Latino colleagues, we were questioned and argued with, or barriers were put up every time we tried to move forward or do more in-depth coverage in our newsroom than just, the cookie cutter things. There were stories that I kept finding that I was shocked that we weren't covering or hadn't been covering in depth and consistently. I would say many times if this were happening in a different zip code, we would have reporters on every corner. But because it's happening in this zip code where this demographic is, the majority of the population, we're not as interested. And I'm not sure if that's because of a money factor or because our viewership doesn't particularly come from this demographic of Latinos or our Black community or whoever it may be. I'm sure there are reasons that play into that, but it's the stories that we want to talk about because they're our communities and we care. And so it was difficult to be in a newsroom for 2 years where I wasn't alone in deeply wanting to go further with our coverage and just getting consistent pushback. They wanted us in the room to talk about the things they wanted to talk about. And when you don't have diversity up and down the decision-making ladder, I realized getting our stories out the door was extremely difficult because we needed buy-in in the pitch room, and we just didn't have that.
I have a question. So do you think that it was any stories about Latinos, or did they want like the producers, the executive producers, whoever decide what the stories were for her, was it only particular stories about the Latino community that they wanted to push, and anything outside of that was a no?
Yeah, I mean, I think we got to do coverage, but like I spoke about in the piece, there were language barriers or stipulations on the outside of getting to report about immigration, for example, that would deter us from even wanting to pursue immigration coverage. So they definitely were open to it. It was just on some days you could and on some days you couldn't. And I don't know if I ever really figured out what the magic formula was to getting it out the door. But again, because we didn't have Latinos, for example, in any sort of upper management position, you really had to defer to the news judgment of our white counterparts who are our managers. And if they decide that it's worth talking about today, then okay, we get to. And sometimes they love it. But other times there's consistent coverage, that stories that deserved that consistent coverage. And for whatever reason, they just weren't newsworthy.
Mm-hmm. And you had, I mean, you were part of, I mean, what I would call a purge at this radio station. I mean, there were 3 of you that were let go. Did you say within a 1 month or a 2 month period?
Yeah, a year within each other. From March 2020 to March 2021, the 3 of us were, let go and replaced. The station likes to tout diversity hiring stats, but when you're letting go and replacing, you are not diversifying your staff. Yeah. You're not adding diversity when all you're doing is meeting a quota. So that was frustrating to see, because the fights that we left unwon just went to the new people, to the new women who were coming in and taking our places. Right. And they would have to decide if they wanted to bear this, especially seeing what we had been punished with as a result of the fight that we had just, put in 2-3 years, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Right. And also concerned about being a new hire and what that means, and,
that's totally what I was thinking, is that, I mean, really the other piece that you're doing is that, and this is what I think, Alex was alluding to, is you're eliminating institutional history, right, around that type of struggle. I mean, Alex and I both work in higher education, and I know that we see it all the time, right? They somebody comes, somebody goes, and then, but you're absolutely right that that is not diversifying. Replacing is not diversifying. And so, I find that whole thing really interesting, especially when you were talking about needing buy-in in the pitch room. And I was just wondering if maybe you could kind of explain that process a little bit. I find that most people don't understand the process of the news. And so maybe if you could just talk a little bit about the pitch room and what happens there.
I joke a lot about other industries. Like, I know what they do in the room. If you weren't in this business, I can't imagine why you would understand, the ins and outs of what goes into putting a story on the news. So playing a little inside baseball, talking about a pitch room, but I mean, that really is where it starts in terms of reporters. And I don't think there is a lot of knowledge about, the importance of having reporters who really are community oriented, who are very much ingrained in what's going on in the inside baseball of each community. Because without us pitching those stories and knowing who to talk to and knowing what's going on a day-to-day basis, you really won't have those stories on TV. That's what makes the reporters so valuable. And I think people look to the anchors and think that's the all-time position to have on the news. And that may be the case for some people, but if you really are looking to tell the stories and help define the coverage of your station, to give people a platform, to help causes be known to the world outside of the community that they're from, you have to be a reporter who is extremely involved with the community. So that's where it starts for us as reporters. We go into, a morning meeting, an editorial, and we pitch, what we have on our minds to cover for that day, something attainable, because we are on a very tight deadline oriented, schedule of getting something on the news every single day by 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, whatever, the time may be, whatever show or producer wants to put your story in their show that day. And you come either unprepared and get assigned to something because there's always news of the day, or you come with ideas about what you would like to cover, what deserves coverage, what needs a platform, whatever the case may be. And you have to believe that you'll be able to turn those interviews, get somebody to sit down with you that day at a certain time, speak with you about the subject, and have that ready to go and on TV by, whatever the time may be, which is generally like 6 or 7 hours from that point. So, you've got to do the work. And that requires, knowing what's going on to be able to say, this is happening today, or this conversation was going on over the weekend. This is worth pushing forward. And from there, like I said, it takes producers interested in putting it in their shows, whatever you're pitching, whatever story it may be. And then it takes, your managers saying, okay, that's good. We hear it. We like it. Like I said, buy-in. We want to see what that would look like in a 90-second package today.
Most people, they have a really hard time understanding that whole process. I think that it's important to understand what it is that you just said. There's so much like unrestrained complaining about the media, right? And one of the things that I find really interesting, people don't really appreciate or understand, how vital a free media is to a functioning democracy, and it goes back to what you were just talking about a second ago, which I've seen, myself in different newsrooms, and I see it every day, at the college that I work at and at other colleges. If everybody that's above us is not a part of our community, when we go in and try to talk to them about this, they do not see the necessity. They don't see why it's important to have stories about the Latino community.
And how could you, right? It's impossible to care about everything or to know everything. I don't know lots of things that are important to the white community or the Black community or the Asian community or the Indigenous community. I couldn't possibly, because those are not my shared experiences. Those are not my lived experiences, and that's not my community. But that is the value of having every single person represented in the room, because you don't know what you don't know, but you have to know that in order to make sure that the right people are there who do know.
That's great, sister. That's right.
I think as to what Todd was saying is, if those people above you are also making the decisions about what is a story that is being told, right, and controlling the narrative, that's also really dangerous. And, I think we get stuck in higher ed in regards to that story of these urban, poor, Black, Latino kids, just trying to get out of their neighborhood, trying this so-called American dream, right? And that's the story that you hear. And it's like, who's making those decisions about that being the story? So it's very frustrating, because that's not all of our stories. Some of us, but not all of us.
Right. And it's important to know that, and important to characterize it as such, because I have said many times in the weeks following this piece, when people ask, what is it about this that's so important? And we are educators. We are the watchdogs for our community. And if in a state like Colorado, you can exist in a bubble of a 70% white population where your neighbors are white, the people who you go to church with are white, your colleagues are white, everyone at the grocery store is generally white, then what you are getting in terms of education about other communities is what we tell you on the news. And if all we have on the news is that someone got shot and that someone's getting deported, then that is the education that you have. That is the width of your understanding about our communities.
Yeah.
So of course you're going to have a prejudice if that's what we are teaching you or telling you or making you believe is the contribution that our communities bring to the fabric of Colorado. Yeah. But that just isn't the case. And in that case, we truly have failed at doing our jobs.
Yeah. I talked about in the email that I sent you, I talked a little bit about the demographics, but really if you look at the way that the demographics are headed in this country, I was just recently reading a report, and it was saying that, over this next century, that there won't be one group that's really major or dominant over the rest, but that there'll be this, what they keep calling the plurality, right? But what they're saying is that by 2040 or 2050, that Latinas will be the majority of the plurality in this country. And I think that that's really fascinating, and so I guess part of it is for me, and thinking about the work that you're doing, that you've committed to do, through the media. How is it that we turn it around as a community so it's not just about murders, and it's not just about drug dealers, and it's not just about people getting deported?
Again, I would say that it's about that representation, not just, in my case, when talking about a news organization, not just at the reporter level, but up and down the decision-making ladder, especially in executive positions, especially in management positions. But what that requires, Dr. Ernesto, is retention, to be able to move people up and down those ladders who have shown their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Problem is, in a newsroom like the one I was in, and what I'm learning is a lot of newsrooms across the country, because this is a very shared experience, more so than I even knew before the piece came out, certainly. Yeah. The problem is that these newsrooms are comfortable for a certain person and not comfortable for others.
Yeah.
We are not unique, Kristen, Sonia, and I, the three who were let go in the last year from 9 News. We are not unique in not staying. Although it wasn't our choice, what is not unique is that others before us, in terms of journalists of color, don't stay and do leave at the time their contract is done, or do leave at the first opportunity that presents itself, because it isn't a comfortable space to stay. However, the newsroom does have the capability of retaining people. They go to that newsroom in Denver to stay, to make their careers there, to live their lives in that community. So there is the possibility of retention. It's retention of a certain kind of person who does well in that newsroom. Yeah. So there has to be a greater priority on everyone being made to feel heard, welcomed, comfortable, understood, and elevated and empowered to continue doing work there. The fight is hard enough to do the jobs that we do. Journalism is not an easy field. Reporting is not an easy job to do. And all of the, producers, executive producers, the editors, photographers, everyone who works in, under the umbrella of a newsroom, these are very grueling hours, very hard to be constantly stressed every single day on a deadline-oriented, lifestyle. There are no holidays off. There are 4 months of the year you literally cannot take time off because of sweeps months. Yeah. I mean, you really have to be very committed to this job, and burnout is a real thing. So the fight alone, just to do the job well, is hard. If the fight is also added to by a whole nother fight of just trying to get stories that you care to tell, that make the job worth doing, out the door and on TV, and you'll fail at that fight, at least half the time, if not more, you're talking about earlier burnout and less buy-in to stay in those places that desperately need reporters like us to stay in the room and do the work. But both of those fights combined, it's extremely emotionally, spiritually, physically, mentally draining. And you will see people choose to go to places where they know they will either get a shot at a different career or at least be more elevated in a different newsroom.
Yeah.
And not having us in the room means there is no one to elevate, because we didn't stick around long enough to earn that.
Yeah. The other piece of that is that, you may have stuck around, but it was never a possibility. It was never going to be offered, right? You were always going to be just there. Right. And so, I've seen that. That's certainly in the industry that I've chosen to be in higher education, that is absolutely real. It's just, a lot of us we will be our teachers, our professors. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it does limit, because I hear administrators say all the time that, recruiting students of color is more expensive than recruiting white students. And I'm just like, how can that be? But I've come to the conclusion that it's more expensive because they don't actually commit to it. It's like when you do something halfway, sometimes it does end up being more expensive because you don't really, then you have to go back and fix all these things that you could have done right the first time, And so I see the same thing.
Yeah.
I see the same thing happening. It's sad. I don't know, Alex.
I think that's the nature of a systemic. That's the nature of a systemic problem, though, right? That it does seep into all kinds of organizations in the same ways. That's why so many industries, I think, can see the similarities to what I'm talking about, and to whatever industry they're in. This isn't just a news organization problem. This is a problem in so many industries and for so many people, because the fabric of what we're built on is a systemic racism problem.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Alex.
No, I was just going to say, just listening, because I find this all like fascinating. I have like a million questions. It's fascinating because I think one of the things that we've been talking about a lot this year is leveraging our power as a community, right? And so when you're talking about those who are gatekeepers, decision makers, right? How is it that we're getting, we, this collective Latino we, right? How is it that we're gaining access to those areas where they are making the decisions, right? And in media, I don't know so well, but when I think about who owns then the news station, who owns the papers, and you were talking about Westworld, like who owns that medium in order to decide what's going on? And is it demographics? Is it budgets? Is it ad buys? Like, and are we then as a community being seen as a powerful demographic economically in order to be able to leverage that power?
Those are all really good questions. I mean, one of the things, I was just participating in a webinar the other day, and one of the people that was speaking, he sort of spoke to some of the points that you were just asking. What he said was that there are more Latinos in the United States than there are people who live in Canada or Australia. He was also saying that if you just took our gross domestic product, that we would be like, in the top 10 of the world in terms of countries. There was something I read not too long ago, and I know I'm just looking at this email that I sent you last night, Lori, and it does say, it talks about this. Latinos are massive online consumers of information, right? With the phones. I mean, we're the number one, or we were before the pandemic anyways, the number one, we may still be actually, movie going population, in the country. I mean, there's just all of these little pieces that fit together. And I find it really interesting, right? And I think that this totally fits in to what you've been talking about, Lori, this past election, where everybody all of a sudden is like, whoa, wait a minute, Latinos, where did these guys come from? Like, what happened? Who are they? That's my favorite question in any news article. Who are they? And I'm like, are you guys freaking kidding me? Who are we? And so as I was reading the article,
in many cases, we're the people who were here before you got here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, we were like, hey, what's up?
Yeah, no, we've been here. Who are you?
Yeah, exactly. So no, I think all those things are true. I guess part of my question is, Lori, as a professional journalist, right? What role do you think that community level media or journalism plays? I mean, there's certainly with YouTube and Facebook and all of this, there's a total democratization of the ability to make media, not so much the ability to promote it or to get a whole bunch of people to listen to it. But, I don't know. What do you think about that?
In terms of us, I guess, controlling where we would put our own content if we wanted to,
where we would put it, or even create it, like I appreciate, like as a professional, right? And I understand the difference between a professional and, somebody who's, not a professional, right? Doesn't necessarily have the training or whatever. Is any of the onus on us as a community to create content? That's actually what I'm talking about, is to create content about the news or the things that are happening.
I think that exists though, right? I think that exists independently. If you want to be somebody who takes on this role of doing it themselves and creating their own, production company, or starting a podcast, or doing something on a YouTube channel. But also there's Telemundo, Univision. We exist in Spanish radio. We exist on, Spanish stations. I think, like you said, it does go back to where where is the Latino community getting their news from in the first place? Are they buying in that much to Spanish channels, let alone English channels, especially English channels that don't represent them? And if not, where are they getting their news? And a lot of that is online, on social media platforms. Is it reliable all the time? Maybe not, which is why I think you're right, that there probably is a better space for people who do it and do it well to find those communities where they're at and help direct them with some serious fact-based news. But I think that that's sort of a development that we haven't turned that corner yet to meet the community where they're going. So there is sort of a gap, but TV has not met its best next competitor in terms of, you know, there's one space where we all go to on our phones or on our computers to get our news. There's a lot of options, but I don't know, you know, if newspaper then entered radio, then entered TV, then entered the internet. I don't know if this space of the internet has been monopolized by something really, really good, doing it really, really right. We're still trying to figure out, just as a news business period, how to make sure that you're going to this one place to get your most reliable information. Social media right now has taken that monopoly, but again, that leaves a lot of room for truth to be smeared or to be different depending on which site you're looking at. So I don't think that there is a great place for the Latino community to go to get their information just yet, but I don't think there's really a great go-to place for anybody to get their information just yet if you're not getting it from TV or from an app that you trust. None of us is all going to the same app, and that's an open space for somebody to do it right. I just don't know that anybody is doing it the best yet.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. Yeah. Especially when it comes
because I know we've always heard where people say, well, I read it on XYZ, you know, on the internet, and it's like, well, how credible is that?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, just because you saw it or read it, it's like I tell my kids, just because you saw it on the internet doesn't mean that it's true, right? And I think that happens across the board with the adults.
I mean, a lot of times too, I think we're taking in like, I saw it on the internet as like a headline and like the two lines that live underneath the article, but like how much is the buy-in of like, let's click it and actually find out what that headline means? So you might have seen it on the internet and you're actually relaying exactly what you saw, but headlines are one thing, and the body of an article or the content of a story when you hit play can be very different than what the headline was just sold to you as.
Yeah.
And I'm super careful with my clicks, right? Like, I don't want to just be clicking on stuff and people.
Well, you just don't go through clicking everything?
I do not.
Alex is like, I'm going to get this algorithm. She doesn't go and starts clicking everything.
She's like, I'm not going to let this be manipulated. If I click on this, I'm going to hear about it.
I do not click on anything that says like, you know, Kardashian or like Meghan Markle, right? I do not click on any of that stuff.
Smart. I've got to take a page out of your book because I'm getting all kinds of weird suggestions. My phones don't know what to make of me. Who is this girl? Sometimes she's incredibly educated and other times she is looking up trash.
Yeah. 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 I've been there. 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm just like, yeah, you know what? Boom. Let's see what this really says. Yeah.
That's really
what did happen to that girl and her boyfriend? I can't believe they're broken up. No. I'll be paying for that for weeks.
You know, the one I really love is like, see the stars like 20 years later, you know, and I'm like, oh, what do they look like now?
And then you've got a virus, like, because you decided to click into it. So yeah.
Right.
Not worth it.
I ain't gonna lie, I always look at those ones.
And you know, as I get older and then I can't see so great and I don't have my glasses on, then I'm like, is this something?
They still look the same to me. Yeah. My 14-year-old the other day wanted to take one of those personality tests online. And I don't know why she asked me, but she was like, is it okay if I do this? And I said, well, it's okay if you do this. I said, but I need to explain to you what's actually happening with this so that you understand, you know. And so we had this whole conversation about algorithms and collecting and data points and all this other kind of stuff. And I was like, okay. I said, do you get it? And she said, yeah. And then she took the test. It's just like, yeah, okay. As long as you know.
That's 10 minutes of both of your lives you'll never get back. She's still taking the test.
She was too. She was like, yeah, Dad. Okay. Yep. All right.
Now let me find out what personality I have.
You know, Lori, I really appreciate you coming to talk to us. I really do. I was quite struck by the story, you know, and just when placed in the context of all of the things that have really taken place in the last year, I think it's easy for us as a community to overlook these individual stories, right? Because, you know, sometimes we are looking at the big picture, but what we forget to, or we fail to sort of remember, is that each one of these little stories is part of the groundswell that leads up to the big picture, you know? And so, I mean, if we're talking about media and we're talking about the way that we're being represented in the media, which is a huge topic, right? But we overlook the story of 3 Latino reporters, you know, who are dismissed in a year, you know, from a TV state, from a Denver TV station, right? Because I know that Colorado is, you know, like you said, 70% white, but Denver has a huge Chicano population.
Absolutely.
It has a deep history in Chicano movement work, right? I mean, it's where the Crusade for Justice is from. I mean, there's all kinds of things that went down in Denver, you know? And so, I mean, you know, how is it? I mean, see, that's the thing, is that we're constantly, lots of times in our community, we're like, well, they have to do a better job. Well, they have to do a better job, but we also have to do a better job supporting and protecting the people who have gotten into the positions that they're in, you know, particularly if they really are delivering for the community. I mean, if they're really delivering for the community, then, you know, the community has to deliver for them too, because media in this country is not a one-way street. No. And that's the other reason why I really wanted you to come too, because I think that we have to be responsible to the media. It's like when people say, oh, the union doesn't do anything for me. And it's just like, well, you are the union. You know, like literally you're a member of the union. So if the union's not doing anything for you, maybe that means that you're not doing anything for you. But I think it's true of media too. I do. I think it's true of newspapers. Poor newspapers though.
If they can try to figure out how to put it, you know, in a great way digitally, they may be able to survive. But there, you know, there goes again with wondering who's going to be able to master being the go-to online. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it absolutely is. It's a relationship between, you know, media and the community. And I saw, you know, the effectiveness of journalism in Denver more than I ever have seen it before in my short career, you know, 5 years. In just the last year, when I saw that our communities were struggling, especially served by public health clinics, community health clinics during COVID when it first started. I mean, I remember talking to a doctor at a community health clinic that's made up 90% of Latino undocumented immigrant patients, somewhere in like the 5,000, you know, range of patients who rely on that clinic in a very Latino community area. They had gotten by May something like 37 COVID tests by May. The doctors didn't even have enough testing to test their staff, let alone the community. And we're wondering, why are cases, you know, rampant in these places?
Why are we dying, right?
Exactly. And in doing stories on that and highlighting the places all across Colorado that were being neglected in huge ways, the state was calling me, asking, where were you? What were the zip codes that you were in? Who should we give tests to? Where do we direct our resources?
Right.
By the summer, that same clinic had so many tests that they opened up a public drive-through because they were being so inundated with tests to right the wrong of the last few months.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of work of bringing something to attention and then having it answered, that's the power of media. If we're in the right places, asking for the right things and holding the right people accountable. Fast forward a year to COVID, vaccine clinics. And I learned that a giant vaccine clinic that's supposed to be for underserved communities in a predominantly Latino area doesn't have any Spanish speaking resources on site. No Spanish speakers, nothing translated, no information on the radio in Spanish. completely unacceptable. Do a story on it, got in a little trouble, but the end result of it was that health partner righted all of those wrongs. I got somebody to help translate the radio station into Spanish. Every sign was translated, every form was translated. There were interpreters in the parking lot, all the way up to getting your shot and getting back out to your car. Bam. At the follow-up vaccine clinic within a month. And we did a follow-up story on that. That was actually my last story at 9, was getting to see the progress that this clinic had made with the help of getting called out and needing to make it right before their next clinic. And they did, and they made it right, more than I could have imagined, but they welcomed me back to do a follow-up story on the changes that they had made and the updates that they had made after being told you have to do better. That is the power of good, involved journalism. Yes. You can see, let me say that there's a problem. Now, if you want me to do a follow-up, show me a solution, and I'll talk about that too. And that is so important, that we are in those spaces to be able to see results like that, or to be able to require results like that. And it takes a relationship between the media and the community that we're talking about. Yeah. But again, we have to be in the room willing to make that relationship happen.
Yeah. You should be proud of that, Lori. That's
Thank
good.
you. I
That's
am.
good
I'm
work.
so proud of that.
Yeah.
So where are you? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was just wondering, because you said you were in Dallas. So what are you doing in Dallas now?
Well, my family's in Texas. It's quite hard to pay rent when you don't have a salary. Yeah. So when I knew my contract would be up the first week of March, I was out of Denver a week later, ended my lease. Right. And yeah, I've been in Texas ever since. I wrote the piece in a couple of days once I got back to Texas. I locked myself in a room and wrote away before I lost my nerve. And then, since it came out, it's been 2 weeks. And dealing with the fallout has actually been, a full-time job. I'm still waiting on my time off because I'm going to get it. I want to sleep. But no, I mean, this has just been too incredible of an outcome to turn my attention away from everything that the piece has garnered. I didn't expect that in a million years, but I'm incredibly grateful to now get to be part of a larger, very important conversation about representation and what that means for our communities and for newsrooms outside of Denver.
Yeah.
I think it was very brave of you to write it. I really do. It's taking a chance. I mean, it is
walking the walk, right? Yeah. It's not just about the talking, it's the walking.
Yeah. I mean, and that's also, I mean, that's another reason why I reached out, because I've taken chances like that. I've been around people who've taken chances like that. And one thing I do know is that the more people who step up and also say, hey, what this person said, it makes it more acceptable, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if it's just one person saying it, then everybody's all like, whatever, they're just mad, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's 10 people or 100 people, or 2,000 people or 100,000 people saying it, right? Then it's public opinion.
That's actually what I was preparing myself for before the piece came out, was being okay with it just being a stepping stone for somebody else in the future. I didn't think that there would be this much buy-in to my initial piece, but I was okay in preparing myself to be okay with a risk like this, because I was hoping that if someone down the road, even a month from now, or later this year or this time next year, unfortunately experiences something similar, that they'll have my piece to say, okay, well, somebody else had this happen. A, I know I'm not alone, but B, now I feel like I have the courage to also do this and add to that case. I didn't expect as much buy-in right away as I got, and I owe a lot of trailblazers before me for being so well received in this time, because there are many people before me who have done or would have done something like this and not, received the support, certainly, but also just the trust that what I'm saying is true.
Yeah. And I think for us, we were talking about like what we can do as a community to leverage this power, right? I think this is it. Amplifying, spreading the story, controlling the narrative. Like, I know we go back to that a lot, but it's really that, like, you being able to tell your story in your words.
My first journalism teacher was a woman named Louise Werble, and she was the advisor for the community college newspaper that I worked for. Louise always told us that the primary responsibility of any journalist is to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. I have always believed that is the truth, and I have always really believed that the majority of other people who become journalists also believe that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why they become journalists, because in their hearts they're crusaders, and so they see this as a way of crusading. And I think that that's really important. And Lori, I see this happening. I really wish you the best, and I have no doubt that this is going to turn out well for you. I think it's just it's one of those rides, like you pay your money and now you're on the roller coaster, and so you're just going to have to hold on to the bar and see where it ends.
I'm holding on tight.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good, sister. We appreciate you being here with us today. Thanks.
Thank you so much for making time to have me. I really appreciate it. I love this conversation. Really fun getting to talk to you.
I'd love to follow up in a couple of months and see where you are too, because there were other couple pieces within what I read that really spoke to me, like when you were talking about how you were told what your look was supposed to be, right? The way that you wore your hair.
That's been a great one too, especially just to get to help educate people about identity, or the professional way that America has gotten to tell, different cultures to look, instead of accommodating that professionalism isn't just white professionalism. So that sparked a lot of really interesting conversations, because it isn't about me being picky about the TV industry telling me how to look. It's much deeper and more important than that. And that matters a lot, to be deemed not professional based on a white perspective of what professionalism is.
Yeah.
This is the reality dysfunction.